Today we continue on our Jesus 2014 series, and what we are looking at is this, is if Jesus were to live today in 2014 with us, how would he react? How would he relate to the world that is around us that we deal with every day? Today we're going to look at this aspect. How would Jesus relate to the hurting that are in our society? And to do, kind of give you an idea of the hurting of America, I'm just going to paint a picture with you with some statistics so you get an idea of the hurting that's in America, that hurting that is surrounding us every day of our lives. Here's some stats for you about our country. 17.6 million Americans suffer from alcohol dependency. 17.6 million. 20 million Americans have used an illegal drug in the last 30 days. Okay? Now, if you don't know and you haven't worked with alcoholic issues and drug issues, most of the time you know if you're in the counseling fields or if you're in ministry and all, you realize most people are involved in those activities because it's a coping mechanism to cover up hurting, to avoid and escape their lives that they're currently dealing with because they need some type of escape because they can't deal with it anymore. So you have that in alcohol and drugs. You have 48 million Americans that use prescription drugs for non-medical reasons. So almost 50 million Americans right now that are using prescriptions, not for actual things that they're suffering from right now. You had 1,060,000 abortions last year in the U.S. The reason I put that on there, if you've worked with people who've had abortions, you know the mental toll it puts on them. You know the hurt it causes them, and you see the anguish when you talk to them and sit down with them that they regret from having the abortion. 47% of marriages have ended in divorce. 2.4 million Americans are actually locked up in our prisons as we sit here this morning. This is a very exact number here. 633,782 people are homeless in America last year when they surveyed it. 43%, as we talked a few weeks ago, 43% of American children are being raised without their fathers. All right? That's the America we live in. And not surprising, based on all those numbers you see up there, 13% of the American population right now is taking antidepressant medications. 13% of our population, from 12 on up, 13% are on antidepressant medications right now just to make it through life. That's the America we live in. What we're seeing is this. We're seeing a greater and greater number of Americans that are hurting, and our society has absolutely no idea how to help them. The only answer we seem to have is this: give them more drugs. Just drug them up, and hopefully that helps them forget the troubles and the hurts that they are facing in their life. And that is our solution as a society. But we're here this morning to discuss this. There is a better way historically that is much more successful to help the hurting find healing than just giving them more drugs. And this solution has been around for about 2,000 years. And the way I describe it might be corny, but I describe it as it's the Jesus model. It's the model that Jesus laid out for us. It's how he related to the hurting. What I want to do here is I just want to read to you 3 scriptures, kind of give you an idea of how Jesus would have related with the hurting, because in his time, there were hurting people all over the place as well. And he interacted with them all the time. Here's how he handled them. The first sentence is in Matthew chapter 9. It says this, it says, Jesus traveled through all the towns and the villages of that area, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. It says Jesus here, when he saw the crowds, he saw them as sheep without a shepherd, that they were confused and they had no idea what to do in life, and they were just sitting there. And it says his reaction is this: he had compassion. He felt their pain, and he went, how do I engage you? We have this one in Mark chapter 6, verse 34. This is the instance where he feeds 5,000 people at the end of this. Understand what leads into this passage. Up to this point, he has spent several hours with thousands of people, and him and his disciples, they say, we are exhausted. We just need to get away from everyone just to go relax a little bit and just kind of recharge. We are absolutely spent. And what it says is they get on a boat to try to escape everyone, but everyone figures out they're on the boat, and they go around the Sea of Galilee as well to meet them when they get off. And as soon as they get off the boat, there's thousands of people, again, wanting their attention and needing them. And this is his response. It says, Jesus saw the huge crowds as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. So we see a Jesus who is spent, a Jesus who is exhausted, but then he sees these people and goes, how can I leave them? How can I leave them? I got to teach them. I've got to spend time with them. And he goes and he teaches them. In Luke chapter 7, he's walking through another town. It says this, as he's walking through, a funeral procession was coming out as he approached the village gate. A young man who had died was a widow's only son, and a large crowd from the village was there with her. Now understand this, it's her only son and she's a widow, which means in that society, she's done. Okay, she's dead. There's nobody to support her. She's going to be a beggar on the streets for the rest of her days until she passes away, and hopefully she gets some crumbs from the table of other people. Jesus sees this, and it says, only son and the large crowd from the village that was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. He said, don't cry, he said. And if you follow the rest of the story, he actually raises her son back to life and gives him back to his mom. And what you see again is you see Jesus approaches the situation. He sees a need. It says his heart breaks. He shows compassion, and he does something to help the people. Now, on the flip side of that, think about how we deal with the hurting when we see them. Okay? This is typically how I react. These are different things I've had go through my mind because I am imperfect just like all of you. But here's some things I think about when I see the hurting around me to justify in my mind why it's okay that I don't help them. One of the ways I do it is this. I'm hurting too. I've got my own problems. So they can go solve theirs because I got my own, and who am I to help them because I got my own problems? Okay, been there? Okay, you've been there. Here's another one I've done. I don't have the time. I've got 2 kids at home. I've got a wife at home. She's got the honey-do list, and I got to get all that stuff done, and I got to take care of this at home, and I got to do this with my job and that. I don't have the time for someone else in my life right now to go help them out because I got enough stuff on my plate. And if I take away time from my family and all the sacrifice to them, is that really a good balance? And I just don't have the time. How many of you put that one through your brain to justify yourself? Right? Been there? Okay. Here's another one I've done. It's going to be too big of an effort. If I get into this thing, they're going to want everything. And I just don't want to give that much. This is too much effort. So instead of helping them, I'm just going to back away. I'm not going to help them because this is too much effort and I'm not in for all that effort. And what I do is, I don't know if it's going to be all that effort, but it's a way to justify it in my mind that I'm okay not helping that hurt because I go, it's going to be a lot. And I can just assume that and then feel good about myself because I can walk away from it and go, I just don't have the ability to help with that much effort. Okay? Another one that I do is this. Everyone is hurting. I can't help them all. So what I will do is I won't help any. Okay? This is one I know we do on a fairly regular basis. We see these people all the time around Tulsa when you get off the highways and everything else and you go, everybody's hurting. I can't help them all. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to help any of them. And then that way I don't even feel like I'm showing favoritism over any of them. And that way I'm actually a good Christian person because as we talked today about in the book of James, it's bad to show favoritism. So I'm not going to help any. I'm going to treat them all bad and I'm not going to help any of them. And then I'm right in God's eyes. Okay? The reason I'm saying this is these are some of the mental games we play in our heads to excuse why we don't intervene when we see hurting people. The last one is this. I don't have the skills to help them. And I don't say this one, this is typically what other people say, and they say to me, I don't have the skills to help them. Thank God I have ministers and counselors to take care of them. All right? And then you go, hey, Scott, can you go help them? Because you're the minister, obviously you have the skills to help them. So I'm not going to help that person, but you will because you have the skills to do it, and I don't have to touch it. All right? This is how we react a lot of times when we see the hurting compared to what we see Jesus do. Jesus, as you look at the scriptures, you see time and time again, Jesus always did 2 things that are very clear when he ran into hurting people. 2 things that he always did, things that he did proactively when he saw hurting people. And that's what I want to look at this morning. Or what are those 2 things? The first one is this. It's very clear cut. Is the first thing we see Jesus always did is he helped with an immediate physical issue. When he saw a physical need, a physical issue, we see Jesus throughout the Bible, he would immediately act and try to help them out. Now, in Jesus' case, most of those times where he actually healed people instantly because people were bringing sick people to him all the time. For us, I don't think any of you are going to be doing that, and if you do that, you haven't told me you do that, but that's not going to be what we're doing. But Jesus, at the same time, he helps people with food, he helps people with items. We see when he saw a physical issue, he reacted and he tried to meet that issue. And that was the simple part. But what we see is this: Jesus never ended there. Jesus never ended with, here's a check, here's a piece of food, here's some clothing, here I put you in a hotel room. Jesus never ended just with that. The next thing we see is this: Jesus always taught them. He would take the time and he would actually instruct them to look at the world and look at life in a different way. And he would actually take the time to teach them. So we have to ask this question: what was he teaching them? Because that's vital for us to know. If he was meeting the tangible needs, any of us can do that. But what was he teaching them after he met the tangible need? What did he sit down and talk to them about? And here's the beauty of it. We get a very detailed description of what he talks about in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. If you know your scriptures there, it's often referred to as a Sermon on the Mount. And it's kind of Jesus' general teaching that he teaches whenever he goes places. And what we see in that is we get a very detailed description of what Jesus would probably sit down with most of these hurting people he ran into and what he would teach them. And that's what I want to cover right now is this. I'm just going to run through kind of a summary of the Sermon on the Mount of some of the topics he touched on. I'm going to phrase it in my own words. I'm not going to be reading directly from Scripture. If you have your programs and you look on the front, that is the teaching Jesus primarily would give in more detail, but those were the teachings when he ran into hurting that he would teach. These are the things he would talk to them about. And here's why I think so. When you live opposite of these things that I'm going to go through, it leads to you hurting. It leads to you being in a mess in life. It leads to depression when you live opposite of these ways. And Jesus comes in and goes, let me teach you how to really think. Let me teach you how to really view the world. So here is what he taught typically to the hurting people. He taught this, number one. He taught them to seek God's approval rather than people's approval. This is a big one. He taught them to seek God's approval rather than people's approval. Let me just tell you on a little secret here. If your whole life is focused on receiving approval from people, you will constantly be disappointed. Constantly be disappointed in your life. You will end up depressed. You will end up feeling lonely. You will end up being mad at people all the time if you are constantly searching for other people's approval to make yourself feel good. So what Jesus taught them is this: stop worrying about what other people think. You worry about what God thinks of you. That's where you find your value. And you can find out what God thinks of you by reading the scriptures. And you can understand that God approves of you. Not because you are perfect, just because you are his. That's why you find approval. So the first thing he would teach them was that: seek God's approval rather than people's approval. Second thing we see in the Sermon on the Mount is he would teach this. He taught them that a religion is worthless, but a relationship is life-changing. One of the things he does is he talks about the religious leaders at the time, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he says they love being out in public and showing everybody their religion and people looking at them and being like, oh, that's all cool. And he's going, but their hearts are not with me. They don't know me. And what Jesus was pointing out was this: if you just go to church for a religion to have some check boxes to make yourself feel like you're a good moral person and somehow God likes you because you follow the check boxes, again, it will lead to depression. It will lead to a faith that's very dry and dull. This is where it leads. It leads to just a routine. It just leads to being part of a country club. What Jesus emphasized was this: you need to have a relationship with the creator of the universe. And when you have a relationship with the creator of the universe, it changes your life. It changes every aspect of your life. Let me just ask a quick question real quick. How many of you have, at some point in your life, been caught up in just following a religion? It was just a checklist of stuff that had nothing to do with your heart. It was just, these are the rules to follow. How many of you have been stuck in that place before? Raise them high. You don't have to be feeling bad about that, okay? You've been there. Is it, Sonia, you're in my small group, so I can point you out real quick. Is it not a very hopeless, depressing, dull place? It is, isn't it? It's just one of those things, like, after a while, you just start figuring out, what's the point of all this? It's too much work, and it doesn't reward me in any way, shape, or form. The rest of you have had a relationship with Christ. And that's different. It's life-changing. It's not just following rules. It's following someone I love. And that's different than a rule book. And that's what Jesus was teaching them was, guys, it's not about religion. It's about following the creator of the universe and having a relationship with him. That's what you're looking for, not just feeling good about yourself because you're checking some boxes. That will lead you to depression. The other big thing he taught, this is a big one for us to even learn. He taught them to stop seeking revenge, holding on to anger, wishing for the worst for their enemies, and judging everyone's actions. But rather, he taught them to love their enemies, pray for those that persecuted them, and actually seek reconciliation with others. One of the biggest things as a minister who gets to counsel people on a regular basis is this. Some of the most depressed people are some of the most angry people. And when you start digging into things, what you find out is they have anger against 50,000 different people of how they've been slighted, how they've been wronged by them, how they did this to me and they did that to me. And you're like, how many years ago did that happen? That was like 20 years ago. And you still live with anger every day towards that person? Yeah. And you start realizing why Jesus was going, hey, you got to let the anger go. You've got to let the resentment go. You've got to let wishing for the worst for people and going, that person hurt me. I can't wait till they get theirs someday. And you think about that and you dwell on that and going, you got to let that stuff go or you're going to end up a depressed person who's just angry. And you're going to go to a counselor someday in the medical field and they're going to go, here's some drugs. Take these. Maybe it will make you feel better. All right? Jesus goes a different route. Jesus says this. He flips everything. He says, I know this is hard, but through the leading of my spirit, you can do this. He says, your enemies, love them. Love them. He says the people who persecute you, the people who actually verbally persecute you and do things intentionally against you that upset you, pray for them. Pray for them. That's what he tells you to do. And then he says, instead of holding grudges against everyone, go out and seek reconciliation with them and try to repair those relationships. You be the one that goes and starts that reconciliation process. Don't wait for them all the time to do it. You go try to start that reconciliation process. And Jesus says, you do everything opposite the world tells you to do, but if you do that, you will find freedom. You will find a way out of your depression if you can find your way through those weeds. Another thing he taught was this. He taught them to resist seeking the limelight and be content with knowing God's value of their life. Limelight, it's an old term. When I wrote this down, I was like, why did I use that word? So I actually had to go research what limelight was because I'm like, I don't even know what that is, but I know it's being in the spotlight. You all know that phrase. It means being in the spotlight. What I found out was back in the early days of plays and stage stuff, they actually did it with candles and all, and they would shine the candle through like a magnifying glass or like some lime substance that created the right color that they wanted for the stage, and that's how you got the limelight, was a spotlight on you. Now we do it all through electricity, but now you know. See? If you learn nothing else today, you're like, at least I learned that. But that was the limelight. But one thing he taught was this. He taught them, stop seeking the limelight and just be content with knowing that God sees everything you're doing and he has value in it. I was up with the teenagers like 5 weeks ago up in the senior high room teaching them for Sunday school. And I like hanging out with them, just chatting with them. And I always find interesting things about them. And one of the interesting things I found was Facebook and Twitter and what was some of the Instagram. What's the other one? There's one other big one. Is it Pine? What? Pinterest or something, okay? I'm just talking to them, and they're all up there on their phones. You know how this whole new generation is. And I'm like the beginning of that generation, but I'm not as bad yet. But they're all on their phones. And I'm like, when you guys actually like post something, are you looking to get likes? And they're all like, well, yeah, you need people to like it or whatever. I'm like, so if you post something and like only 2 people like it, does that make you feel bad? Yeah, makes me feel down, like no one cares. And I'm like, wow, okay, we've hit a new place. But what you see is this, and this isn't new. Our younger generation now, through social media, if they feel like people aren't paying attention to their stuff, get depressed because they feel like there's no value. No one cares about me. And here's what Jesus taught was this. Stop worrying about fame. Stop worrying about everybody knowing your name. That's not the purpose of life. If you're looking for that, you will always end up depressed. You will always end up hurting. And he taught, basically, you need to be fully understand how God sees you, that God knows everything you do, every post you make, every action you do. God knows that. And the heaven, what it talks about, the great set of witnesses that look down on you and cheer you on, they know what's going on. So if 24 people don't like your thing on Facebook, that's okay. Okay? You don't have to get depressed about that. Why? The creator of the universe knows every hair on your head. You don't need the limelight from people to be staring at you and know who you are, because the God of the universe knows who you are. That's where you find value. All right? The last thing that I summarized is that he taught them to value things of eternal significance rather than things of temporal significance. Another thing that leads to great depression, great hurting, is people get hurt because they lose temporal possessions. Like, people actually get depressed because they lose temporal possessions. Now, I say that and most of us go, well, absolutely, because that's just the culture we're raised in. But think about it in the large picture of things. So I lose my house and I move into something smaller. Do you really need to be depressed about that? You still have heat, you still have cooling, you still have a place to lay your head, and you're upset because you had to downsize. It's like in America, if you have to downsize your possessions, it's like the worst thing anyone could ever bestow on you. All right? At the same time, you see people I always have to have bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and if I can't get the bigger in my dreams, somehow I'm depressed. The beauty is the people that I see in my life that go, I'm content living where I am, and I could get into bigger things, but for the value of my family and for the value of my spouse and things like that, I'm not going to, because we're okay where we are. And those are people you find that are content, that love life, that usually don't struggle with a whole lot of depression. They're usually the really stable people that you go, these are the stable people that when I'm depressed, I need to go talk to. Why? They somehow have figured out the key to go, I don't care about temporary possessions, I care about eternal ones. And when you can make that change in your life, it's life-changing again. You want to talk about depression? Stop worrying about all the temporal things and how you're not meeting the race of the Joneses and how your neighbor has better stuff than you, or the people down the road have better stuff than you. If you have a place to lay your head and a place for your family to be safe, be happy and content and thank God. Don't get depressed over it. Okay? It's the stuff. It all goes away. None of it gets buried with you. None of it goes beyond this life with you. Only the things you do in the name of Jesus Christ goes with you. Those are the only things that will ever be remembered. And Jesus wanted people to understand that clearly. A couple of things Jesus said in other passages. He said this. He says, the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. He also said in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What you see is this. Jesus had the solution for the hurting, and he has given us a responsibility to pass that information on to the rest of the world. Jesus had the solution. But to do that effectively, one thing we have to make sure we have done is we have to make sure that Jesus has healed us. That Jesus healed us. What I mean by that is this. On the front of your program, have you learned those things? Are those things you have applied to your life? Do you integrate those things into how you live on a daily basis? To be effective, to help the hurting that we run into, we have to make sure we're not broken just like they are. We have to make sure that Jesus has healed us so that we are stable enough to help them. So we need to make sure our life is being changed by Christ so we can change others in the same way. You can't be broken. What we see is this. Jesus, we asked this question at the beginning. How would Jesus react to the hurting? It's very clear. He had compassion for them, number one. His heart broke for them. He didn't just look past them and try not to see them. He saw them and he had compassion. He helped them in their immediate needs, and then he would instruct them with the truth that leads to freedom and life. That's what he would do, and that's what we're called to do. I want to close this morning with this passage. It's one that we started with. It was the first passage I read this morning. And what I want to do is read it again, but I want to read the part that I left off because it's very important for us to understand. Here's what it says in Matthew 9. It says, Jesus traveled through all the towns and the villages of that area, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. and he healed every kind of disease and illness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then he goes on, he says, and he said to his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest. Ask him to send more workers into his field. What I want you to leave here this morning is knowing this. You are that worker that Jesus was praying for. If you wear the name of Christ on your life right now, you are that worker he was praying for. You have the knowledge of Christ that can help heal the hurting people in your life. And we are called to share it, and we are called to help the hurting and show them a different way to view life through the eyes of Jesus. Would you pray with me?